Beverly Hills. A private party so exclusive there were no invitations, only phone calls. No press. No photographers. Just Hollywood royalty, martial artists, producers, fighters, and a few men whose reputations were bigger than their names. The kind of party where egos roam freely because consequences don't usually exist. Chuck Norris arrived confident, already respected, already feared in certain circles. Karate champion. Tournament legend. The man Hollywood was quietly starting to build into something larger. He wasn't drunk. He didn't need to be. Chuck's confidence came from trophies, from knockouts, from years of being the toughest man in whatever room he walked into. Bruce Lee was already there. Bruce didn't make entrances. He didn't need to. People felt him before they saw him. Calm. Centered. Talking quietly. Listening more than speaking. He wore no jewelry. No flashy clothes. Nothing that said, star. But everyone knew who he was. The man redefining martial arts. The man people whispered about. The man who embarrassed professionals without ever raising his voice. Two alpha forces. One room. At first, they didn't interact. They didn't need to. The tension existed without contact. People noticed it. Conversations slowed when Chuck moved closer to Bruce's circle. Smiles stiffened. This wasn't hostility. It was anticipation. Later in the night, the conversation turned, as it always does at parties like this, to fighting. Someone mentioned how martial arts movies were becoming exaggerated. Too flashy. Too theatrical. It's not real fighting anymore, someone said. Chuck laughed. Not cruelly. Not loudly. But confidently. Exactly, he said. It looks good on screen, but most of that stuff wouldn't work in a real fight. Real fighting isn't about looking cool. It's about effectiveness. A few people nodded. This was Chuck's world. He had the credentials. He had the receipts. Then someone mentioned Bruce's name. Chuck shrugged. Bruce is talented, he said. But let's be honest. He's more of a showman than a fighter. Fast, flexible, sure. But in a real fight, against a real trained opponent, that kind of stuff breaks down. The room went quiet. Not because Chuck was wrong. Not because people disagreed. But because Bruce Lee was standing 10 feet away. Bruce heard every word. He didn't react immediately. No facial change. No tension. He finished his sentence. Nodded to the man he was speaking with. Then he turned. He walked toward Chuck. Not fast. Not slow. Just inevitable. People parted without realizing they were moving. Like water around a stone. Bruce stopped in front of Chuck. Looked up slightly. Calm eyes. No smile. Chuck, Bruce said softly. I heard what you said. Chuck met his gaze. No fear. No hostility. Just curiosity. Did you? Yes. A pause. Bruce tilted his head slightly. You think what I do isn't real? Chuck crossed his arms. I think it works on camera. I think in a real fight, against someone trained, disciplined, conditioned, it wouldn't hold up. Bruce nodded. You've never fought someone who uses it properly. Chuck smiled. That's possible. Another pause. The air thickened. Conversations stopped entirely now. Everyone was watching. Bruce spoke again. Would you like to see if it holds up? Chuck laughed lightly. Here. Yes. Here. Chuck glanced around. You want to fight at a party? Bruce shook his head. No. I don't need to fight you. I just need to demonstrate. Chuck hesitated. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood something most people didn't. Bruce wasn't posturing. He wasn't angry. He was offering proof. All right, Chuck said. Demonstrate. Bruce gestured to a nearby open space. Not a ring. Not a stage. Just floor. Stand here, Bruce said. Chuck complied. Bruce positioned himself an arm's length away. Smaller. Lighter. Unassuming. Push me, Bruce said. Chuck blinked. Push you? Yes. Chuck chuckled. You sure? Yes. Chuck placed his hands on Bruce's chest and pushed. Firm. Controlled. Not full power. Bruce slid back half a step, then stopped. That's it? Chuck asked. Bruce nodded. Now push me like you mean it. Chuck adjusted his stance and pushed harder. Bruce didn't move. Chuck's smile faded slightly. He pushed again, harder still. Engaged his legs. His core. Bruce remained rooted, unmoving. Bruce looked at him calmly. Again. Chuck pushed with everything he had. Nothing. The room was silent. Chuck stepped back. Not embarrassed, but intrigued. Bruce said, Now I push you. Chuck nodded. Go ahead. Bruce placed 2 fingers on Chuck's chest. 2 fingers. Ready? Bruce asked. Chuck braced. Bruce pushed. Chuck stumbled backward 3 steps. Nearly lost his balance. Caught himself just before falling. The room reacted all at once. Gasps. Murmurs. A few nervous laughs. Chuck straightened up slowly. His expression had changed. Not anger. Not humiliation. Respect. How? Chuck asked. Bruce smiled faintly. Structure. Timing. Relaxation. You're strong. But strength without efficiency leaks. Chuck nodded slowly. Bruce continued. You rely on force. I rely on alignment. Chuck exhaled. Interesting. Bruce stepped closer. You said what I do wouldn't hold up in a real fight. Chuck didn't interrupt. Bruce said, Would you like to test that further? Chuck looked around. Every eye was on them. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about truth. What do you propose? Chuck asked. Bruce raised his hands. Open palms. You try to touch me. Just touch me. No strikes. Chuck hesitated. Then nodded. He stepped forward. Bruce moved. Not fast. Not flashy. Just gone. Chuck reached again. Missed. Again. Nothing. Every time Chuck advanced, Bruce was somewhere else. Inches away. Just out of reach. Calm. Balanced. After 30 seconds, Chuck stopped. He was breathing harder than Bruce. He smiled. All right, Chuck said. I see it. Bruce lowered his hands. You see some of it. Chuck laughed softly. Fair. There was no applause. No cheering. Just silence. Then Chuck did something no one expected. He bowed his head slightly. In front of everyone, Chuck said, I said what you do wouldn't work. I was wrong. The room seemed to exhale. Bruce nodded. Thank you. Chuck extended his hand. Bruce took it. Their handshake wasn't performative. It wasn't symbolic. It was sincere. Later that night, Chuck sat quietly, nursing a drink he barely touched. Bruce joined him. You didn't have to do that, Chuck said. Yes, I did, Bruce replied. Words shape perception. Perception shapes respect. Chuck nodded. I respect you. Bruce smiled. Good. Now forget about me. Focus on yourself. Chuck laughed. That might be harder. Bruce stood. Come train sometime. Chuck looked up. You'd teach me. Bruce shrugged. If you're willing to unlearn. Chuck didn't answer immediately. The next morning, Chuck woke up replaying the night. Not the stumble. Not the crowd. The feeling. The feeling of reaching and missing. Of pushing and failing. Of realizing there were layers he hadn't touched yet. He showed up to Bruce's school a week later. Bruce was already teaching. Chuck waited. Watched. Listened. When the class ended, Bruce approached him. You came, Bruce said. Chuck nodded. I meant what I said. Bruce studied him. Training with me won't make you famous. It won't make you unbeatable. It will make you honest. Chuck smiled. That's what I want. They trained together for months. Not as rivals. As craftsmen. Bruce corrected Chuck relentlessly. Not with ego. With precision. Relax your shoulders. Stop forcing. You're thinking too much. Feel it. Chuck struggled. Often. His habits fought back. His strength worked against him. Bruce never raised his voice. "You're trying to win," Bruce said once. "There is nothing to win." Chuck nodded, frustrated. "Then what am I doing wrong?" Bruce replied, "You're trying to be strong, instead of being present." That lesson stayed. Years later, Chuck would speak of Bruce rarely. But when he did, his tone changed. "Bruce Lee didn't make me weaker," Chuck once said. "He showed me where I was rigid." The party became a quiet legend. No footage. No headlines. Just a moment where two masters tested truth. One spoke with confidence. One responded with demonstration. No fists. No blood. No shouting. Just reality, revealed. Bruce never told the story. Chuck never exaggerated it. They didn't need to, because the lesson was simple. Ego wants validation. Mastery wants clarity. And clarity always wins. That night, Chuck Norris learned something no trophy ever taught him. Real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. And when tested, it doesn't argue. It simply is. Years later, people would ask Chuck Norris what changed him. What sharpened him? What gave his presence that quiet weight that couldn't be explained by belts or titles? He would smile, deflect, talk about discipline, consistency, faith. He never told them about the moment his certainty cracked. But the moment never left him. Because humiliation isn't loud when it's real. It's quiet. It sits with you. It replays when the noise fades. Chuck realized something that night that no tournament ever taught him. He realized that being respected in a room is not the same as being right. That winning fights is not the same as understanding fighting. That confidence built on comparison collapses the moment it meets something deeper. Bruce never mocked him. Never gloated. Never told the story. That was the most brutal part. Bruce treated the exchange like math. You test a theory. If it fails, you discard it. No emotion attached. That disturbed Chuck more than any punch could have. Most men can handle being beaten. What they can't handle is being corrected without drama. Without anger. Without validation. Bruce didn't need Chuck to lose. He needed truth to stand. Over time, Chuck noticed changes in himself. Subtle at first. He spoke less in rooms where he used to dominate. He listened more. He questioned assumptions that once felt untouchable. He stopped equating toughness with tension. Bruce's lessons weren't techniques. They were filters. "Why are you tight?" Bruce would ask. "Because I'm ready," Chuck would answer. Bruce would shake his head. "You're afraid of losing control." That sentence hit harder than any strike. Bruce taught that real control comes from relaxation. That speed comes from softness. That power leaks when ego interferes. Chuck resisted at first. Then surrendered. Not to Bruce. To reality. As months passed, their sessions changed. Less correction. More silence. More flow. Bruce would move. Chuck would follow. Not copy. Adapt. One afternoon, after training, Chuck sat quietly, staring at the floor. "What is it?" Bruce asked. Chuck said, "I spent my whole life proving I was the toughest man in the room. I don't know who I am without that." Bruce nodded. "Good." Chuck looked up. "Good." "Yes. Now you can find out." That was Bruce's gift. He didn't replace ego with obedience. He replaced it with curiosity. When Bruce died in 1973, the martial arts world froze. Shock rippled outward. Rumors. Questions. Anger. Loss. Chuck attended the memorial quietly. No speeches. No statements. He stood in the back, head bowed, hands still. People noticed. They always did. But they didn't approach. They sensed this wasn't about status. Later, when reporters asked Chuck about Bruce, he kept it short. "He was ahead of us," Chuck said. "Not faster. Deeper." That was all. As Chuck's career exploded, something else became clear. He didn't fight the same way. He didn't move the same way. He didn't speak the same way. There was restraint now. Economy. Precision. Viewers couldn't articulate it, but they felt it. He wasn't proving anything anymore. And that's why it worked. The party became a whispered story. A moment where two legends intersected. Some exaggerated it. Some distorted it. Some turned it into myth. But the truth was simpler. There was no dominance. No defeat. Only correction. Bruce didn't make Chuck apologize to feel powerful. He made him apologize so words would align with reality. Because truth doesn't need enemies. It needs accuracy. Chuck understood that. Years later, when young fighters asked Chuck for advice, he rarely talked about winning. He talked about posture, breathing, listening. And sometimes, if they pushed, if they wanted something deeper, he'd say quietly, "The strongest man in the room is usually the calmest." He never said where he learned that. He didn't have to. Because real lessons don't announce themselves. They settle in. They reshape you. They change how you move through the world. That night, at a party full of noise, Chuck Norris learned something that never left him. You don't defend truth with ego. You demonstrate it. And if you're wise enough, you let it change you. Decades passed. Hollywood changed. Martial arts evolved. Legends grew taller with time. Stories blurred at the edges. But the essence of that night stayed sharp for the two men who mattered. Bruce Lee never spoke of it because, to him, it wasn't a victory. It wasn't even an event. It was a correction. A moment where misunderstanding met reality and adjusted itself. Nothing more. Chuck Norris carried it differently. Not as a scar. As a compass. Whenever he felt himself tightening, on set, in interviews, in training, he remembered the sensation of pushing and getting nowhere. Of reaching and finding empty space. Of realizing that effort without awareness is just wasted force. That memory became a quiet governor on his ego. He noticed it in others too. Young fighters full of tension. Actors mistaking confidence for volume. Men trying to dominate rooms instead of understand them. He didn't correct them. He let life do that. Bruce had taught him that lesson as well. Correction only works when the student is ready. Years later, Chuck would be asked why he never publicly challenged Bruce's philosophy, why he never tried to prove his own system was superior. He would shrug. "There's nothing to prove," he'd say. "If something works, it works. If it doesn't, reality will tell you." That answer confused people. It wasn't dramatic enough. It didn't feed rivalries. It didn't generate headlines. But it was honest. What most people never understood was that the apology at the party wasn't the lesson. It was the doorway. The real lesson came afterward, in the silence, in the repetition, in the discomfort of unlearning. Bruce never tried to turn Chuck into someone else. He refined what was already there. Removed excess. Exposed inefficiency. Replaced force with clarity. One night, long after Bruce was gone, Chuck sat alone watching an old fight tape. Not of Bruce. Of himself. Younger. Tighter. Louder. He paused the frame. "That guy thought he knew," Chuck said to no one. Then he smiled. Because knowing, he realized, isn't a destination. It's a posture. Open. Relaxed. Ready to be corrected. That was the real confrontation that night. Not between two men. Between certainty and curiosity. One insulted out of confidence. One responded out of understanding. And understanding won. That's why the story endures. Not because of who was humbled, but because of how. No violence. No hatred. No spectacle. Just truth, demonstrated quietly, in a room full of noise. And a man wise enough to recognize it when it stood in front of him. That's real strength. And it never needs to raise its voice. Long after the details of that party faded from public memory, its impact continued to echo in ways no one could trace back to a single night. Because moments like that don't announce themselves as turning points. They feel small while they're happening. Almost ordinary. Just a conversation. Just a correction. Just a realization that settles in later, when the noise is gone and the excuses don't work anymore. Chuck Norris didn't walk away that night feeling defeated. He walked away feeling exposed. And exposure, when it's honest, is a gift disguised as discomfort. He began to notice how often ego had guided his reactions. How often he'd spoken first, asserted first, assumed first. Bruce never told him to stop. He simply showed him what happened when assumptions met reality. That lesson bled into everything. In training, Chuck stopped muscling techniques. He searched for alignment. In conversations, he paused before asserting certainty. On set, he stopped trying to dominate scenes and instead let them breathe. People around him felt the difference, even if they couldn't name it. There was less tension. More gravity. Bruce used to say, "The most dangerous person in the room is the one who has nothing to prove." Chuck finally understood what that meant. It wasn't about humility as submission. It was about humility as efficiency. Ego wastes energy. Clarity conserves it. One is loud. The other lasts. The irony was that the more Chuck let go of proving himself, the more formidable he became. Not because he tried to be, but because there was no resistance left inside him. That was Bruce's deeper teaching. Strength isn't something you add. It's something you uncover when you remove what's unnecessary. Years later, when young fighters challenged Chuck, hoping to test themselves against a legend, he didn't discourage them. He didn't intimidate them. He let them come forward. And often, just like Bruce had done, he didn't strike. He stepped aside. He redirected. He let them feel their own imbalance. And when they looked at him, confused, breathing hard, wondering what just happened, Chuck would smile slightly. Not with superiority. With recognition. Because he'd been there. The story of that night survives because it reflects something universal. Everyone has had a moment where their certainty met something deeper. Where words failed. Where identity cracked just enough to let truth in. Most people run from that moment. Chuck didn't. That's why it mattered. Bruce Lee didn't win a fight that night. He corrected a misunderstanding. He defended reality without aggression. He turned an insult into a lesson, and a rival into a student. And Chuck Norris proved something just as rare. That real strength isn't refusing to bow. It's knowing when to. That's why the story endures. Not as gossip. Not as myth. But as a reminder. Ego speaks first. Mastery listens. Truth doesn't argue. It demonstrates. And the only question is whether you're strong enough to recognize it when it does. In the end, the night was never about who stood taller, who moved faster, or who carried the bigger reputation into the room. It was about alignment. One man spoke from certainty built on success. The other responded from understanding built on mastery. And mastery doesn't rush. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand agreement. It waits. Bruce Lee didn't need Chuck Norris to lose. He needed truth to be respected. He didn't humiliate to dominate. He demonstrated to clarify. And when the moment passed, he let it go completely. Chuck carried it forward. Not as a story to tell. As a standard to live by. That apology, spoken quietly in front of everyone, wasn't the end of his pride. It was the beginning of his depth. The moment he stopped measuring himself against others and started refining himself instead. That's why both men walked away stronger. One because he never let ego speak for him. The other because he learned to silence it. Years from now, when names fade and details blur, that will be the part that remains. Not the party. Not the insult. Not even the apology. But the lesson. That real power doesn't need permission. Real confidence doesn't need comparison. And real strength never needs to announce itself. It simply stands there, calm and undeniable, waiting for the world to test it. And when it does, it doesn't argue. It demonstrates.